The first words you see on the website of today's guest are, tell people something they know already, and they will thank you for it. Tell them something new, and they will hate you for it. That caught my eye. And in his newest book, Heat, How to Stop the Planet Burning, George Monbiot claims, quote, we are the most fortunate generation that has ever lived, and we are the most fortunate generation that ever will. Do you believe he's right? And if so, take a moment. How does that feel? He goes on to make the case that we cannot go on enjoying the benefits of a life built on the dirty energy of fossil fuels. We must either address the problem, which will involve sacrifice, or ignore it, which will involve consequences. The only way to avoid further devastation, Monbiot argues, is a 90% cut in CO2 emissions in the rich nations of the world by 2030. He believes, again, quote, we are the last generation that can make this happen, and this is the last possible moment at which we can make it happen. This is more than an inconvenient truth. Imagine yourself looking back from 2030. Did humanity turn things around? If not, again, how does that feel? And if they did, try to imagine, and this is what I'm going to talk to George Monbiot about, how did we do it? Finally, what did you do? In personal and political terms, you're looking back from 2030. What did you do to influence how that all turned out? George Monbiot has been named by the Evening Standard as one of the 25 most influential people in Britain, and by the Independent on Sunday as one of the 40 international prophets of the 21st century. He writes a weekly column for The Guardian, and his website currently receives 40,000 hits a month. He's the author of several books, including Captive State, The Corporate Takeover of Britain, The Age of Consent, A Manifesto for a New World Order, and his latest, Heat, How to Stop the Planet Burning. In 1995, Nelson Mandela presented him with the United Nations Global 500 Award for Outstanding Environmental Achievement. Welcome, George Monbiot.
Thanks very much, Terry.
I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we talk about. So, on your site, your bio states that during 7 years of investigative journeys in Indonesia, Brazil, and East Africa, you were shot at, beaten up by military police, shipwrecked, stung into a poisoned coma by hornets. You then came back to work in Britain after being pronounced clinically dead in Lodwar General Hospital in northwestern Kenya, having contracted cerebral malaria. Your bio at Wikipedia adds that your activities led to your being made persona non grata in several countries and sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia in Indonesia. Tell me just a little about those years.
Well, I was working as an investigative journalist in these countries, trying to get to the bottom of land theft and the destruction of forests and other environmental resources and the seizure of the resources belonging to indigenous people. And for some reason, governments didn't want me to do this, and I kept getting myself into trouble with them. I think I pushed it a little bit too far in Indonesia because I went into the head police office in Jakarta and stole a pad of headed notepaper and a stamp, and I made myself a pass to visit these forbidden areas. What I was put on trial for in my absence was espionage. It wasn't espionage, it was investigative journalism, but it was a dictatorship at the time. It was under Suharto's government, and there was simply no other way of doing it. You had to make up your own rules, really. It was pretty hairy. There were several times when I thought I was going to die, and I had too many encounters with armed men for comfort. And it has to be said that all this was a while ago, and these days the most dangerous thing I do is forgetting to do the washing up. Right,
yes. Your age in those years and your age now?
I'm now 44, and when I started that work I was 24. When I went to Indonesia I was 24.
Okay. Now one other thing...
And being a young man, I seem to have a death wish.
Right, as we are in our 20s immortal.
Yes. I don't know how it changes, but unfortunately it does.
It does.
Yeah.
I also read that your father is a deputy chairman of the Conservative Party in the UK and chairman of the National Convention.
He used to be, yes.
He used to be.
No longer.
Let me ask you, given what conservative means in the U.S., is that as odd a juxtaposition as it sounds?
Yes, it is. It is odd. My politics and his politics are very different. It's an interesting thing that people from families which are politically active often become political, but not necessarily political in the same way. And in my case, I'm political in a very different way. And I think maybe the reason is that you become political is that politics is part of growing up, and you have political discussions at the dinner table, and you test ideas and you argue over ideas when you're a child, and then you become interested in those ideas, and eventually you get your own perspective on them, and you find that your approach to them can be very different from your father's, even though you're still interested in the same ideas.
Yeah. And let's follow that train a little bit. In your 2003 book, The Age of Consent, a manifesto for a new world order, you set out this manifesto for change for the global justice movement. Now, to my mind, as multinational corporations dominate national governments and international institutions, WTO, World Bank, IMF, and our world becomes more interconnected, our problems from terror to climate change become global and call for global accountability. What was it, if you could briefly tell us, you proposed, and has your thinking evolved since then?
What I proposed was a democratization of the organs of global governance. Now, some people say, "Oh, you're trying to create global governance." I'm not. It exists already. You've just given a list of some of the agencies which already make decisions at the global level. To that list, we can add the UN Security Council and several other organizations as well. But what we have at the global level is a lot of power in the hands of people like the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization and the UN, but absolutely no democratic accountability whatsoever. And what I called for was several things, and I still stand by this. One is a world parliament where you have a gathering of people who are directly elected by the people of the world, all over the world, whose purpose is to put pressure on those unelected global bodies, because what the parliament would have would be democratic legitimacy, which those bodies don't. And so its purpose would be to hold them to account.
If I may, it seems to me a bit like a House of Lords and a House of Commons.
I suppose so, except in a way the other way round, because the House of Commons is the powerful one, but and it's elected, and
right.
The House of Lords is the less powerful one, but it's not elected.
Right.
In this case, the World Parliament.
But two bodies, one of the entrenched and one of the people.
Exactly. But then I also want to change the bodies of the entrenched. And when it comes to the World Bank and the IMF, they are simply not viable, legitimate organizations. Their constitution, their articles of association ensures that they are wholly controlled by the rich nations, even though almost all their work is in the poor nations. And in fact, the more they influence the economy and politics of your country, the less say you have in the way in the way they work. They are the perfect dictatorship. And while there have been many calls for their reform, it's very clear to me that because of the way they are constitutionally established, they are unreformable. They are the wrong institutions, doing the wrong job, and governed by the wrong distribution of power. I would like to scrap those and replace them with the organization first proposed by John Maynard Keynes in 1943, which is an international clearing union. And the whole idea of that is that you have a body controlled by all the countries in the world. They all have a say in the way it operates, which puts equal pressure on the creditor nations and the debtor nations to balance the global economy, so that you don't get this situation where debt leads to more debt, leads to more debt, leads to more debt, and countries just fall further and further behind as they have compound interest to pay, and they get stuck in this great rut of poverty. Keynes's solution would have very neatly sorted out many of the problems which the world faces today. It was rejected under very strong pressure from the US Treasury at the time, and this far worse one for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank was put in to replace it. I think we need to reverse that 60 years of disastrous history by going back to Keynes's idea.
Now, let me just, before we shift to talking about heat and global warming, it seems to me that with so much focus these days on terror and Iraq and so on in people's, in front of their eyes all the time, that what you're saying makes all the sense in the world. Is there any movement toward reform or change in those institutions? We need accountability to deal with global environmental problems, global terror problems, global public health problems, and it just doesn't exist.
No, and it really doesn't. And it's tragic to see within the World Bank, for example, everybody's going on about, we've got rid of Wolfowitz, hooray, hooray, problem solved. The problem's not solved. Yes, we all hate Wolfowitz. We know what he's like. We know what he does. But that is not the problem. He was no worse as head of the World Bank than any of the previous heads of the World Bank, because they all do the same thing, which is to institute the Washington Consensus, to impose it on everybody else. And Wolfowitz just did it worse than the other people. So in a way, he was a better head of the World Bank because he was less efficient.
Exactly.
And the idea that replacing him with some other person mandated by the U.S. Treasury to go and stamp Wall Street's demands upon the rest of the world is going to solve this problem is just crazy. The World Bank itself is illegitimate, not just the former president of the World Bank.
Right. Okay, let's turn to the new book, Heat. You say in that book that the odds that we've already passed the point at which positive feedback is inevitable in the global climate. And people, I mean, at this point, much different from maybe a year or two ago, people have a sense of what climate change is and how inevitable it is and how dire it is. But what is this positive feedback, and what's your latest assessment?
Just like to clarify what you said. We've passed the point at which some positive feedback takes place, but not so far the most dangerous positive feedback. And positive feedback means a process generating itself. So in other words, it's a vicious circle. It's something which you start a process going, and it means that process will be accelerated under its own momentum. And with climate change, the positive feedback works like this. We started off by producing our carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gases which warm the planet. As that warming takes place, the world's natural systems respond in such a way that they too begin to produce greenhouse gases. I'll give you a few examples. In the tundra of the Arctic is a huge amount of methane frozen up in the permafrost. Now, methane, or methane as you call it here, is a very powerful greenhouse gas, even more powerful than carbon dioxide. But fortunately, it's remained locked up in the tundra because that tundra is permanently frozen. But as warming proceeds and as the tundra begins to melt, then that methane is released. That causes more warming, that causes more melting, that causes the release of more methane. Then you've got tropical forests. As they get close to their critical physiological limits, and they're already pretty close to them, it's just a very small temperature rise can push them over the edge, the trees start to die back. Trees are basically sticks of wet carbon. As those trees die, the carbon oxidizes, it becomes carbon dioxide. In the soil, the bacteria, as the world gets warmer, their metabolic rate increases, they produce more carbon dioxide. It goes on and on like that. And now what this means is that if you allow temperatures to reach in the order of 2 degrees centigrade or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, you reach the point of no return.
No, if you allow the increase in temperature.
The increase in temperature above the pre-industrial level, above the level it was before we started producing our carbon dioxide emissions in a big way.
And according to the best calculations, where are we now?
About 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit, or 0.7 to 8 degrees centigrade.
So a third of the way.
Yes, but the problem is that we've already produced the carbon emissions which are going to take us further, because carbon dioxide spends a long time in the atmosphere. And so we're already committed to more warming than that. We're already committed to something in the order of 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.3 degrees centigrade.
Okay, let's stick on that one for a moment. In other words, what you're saying is that the results of what we've done so far, as we can see them today, are not fully the results of what we've done so far.
That's right. Exactly.
The results of what we've done so far are inevitably, no matter what happens. If civilization stopped right now, global warming would still increase that percentage by what we've already put up there, correct?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But what we now have to do is to make drastic cuts in the carbon dioxide we're producing now in order to prevent that going even further than what we're committed to already and going to 2 degrees centigrade or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit of warming above pre-industrial levels, because that really is the trigger point.
And what you're saying, and again, I'm trying to condense this and correct me whenever I go too quickly, that trigger point leads to those positive feedback loops you talked about, which are anything but positive. Positive feedback merely means they reinforce themselves. But what you're saying is that if we hit the 2, or in this country, the 3.2 increase, then things cascade, things leap in the level of their consequences, correct?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And basically it means 2 degrees centigrade of warming leads inexorably to 3 degrees. 3 degrees leads inexorably to 4 degrees. You let it get to 2 degrees centigrade of warming, and the problem is snatched out of our hands. We can't pull it back anymore.
Okay, now, I'm going to ask this question in a dumb way, but if the developed countries cut theirs back and China and India kept going forward, that's one scenario. If China and India didn't move forward and we didn't cut ours back, because there's this fight between the two of them which seems so insane. One saying, why should I do it if they don't? The other one's saying, why should I do it if they don't? When in fact the world fails if either of them don't.
Exactly. And at the moment, as you suggested, there's perfect circle of finger pointing as every country uses every other country as its excuse for not taking action. And we have to break that circle. And it is incumbent on the rich nations to be the ones who break it. Because the poor nations otherwise will turn around and say, well, you've had your fun.
Of course.
Why can't we have ours?
Right. It's like it's midnight, the party's just going good, and we say, party over.
That's right. Just as they turn up at the door with a bottle in their hands, you say, sorry, party over. That's, absolutely. So we have to be the ones who say, whoa, we're going to show the way, we're going to show some leadership on this issue, and we are going to show that we're serious about it, cutting our own emissions, so that they can then enter that with faith that they're not going to be left high and dry when we break the agreement.
Now, in the book, it seems to me you deal with two things. One, you have steps that, in other words, you, as realistic as your analysis of where we stand is, you seem still somewhat optimistic in terms of that there are steps we can take to do it. I'm going to tell people what they're listening to, and then I'm going to come back to those steps, although, let me say, undergirding it all is, unless the political steps happen, they won't happen. What do we do?
Right. We, first of all, set ourselves a target. The target has to reflect the science rather than the politics. We say we need, in the rich nations, a 90% cut in carbon emissions by 2030. And that is the only thing which will give us a high chance of preventing 2 degrees centigrade of warming. So, having set ourselves a target, we then look sector by sector at how that cut can be achieved. A 90% target across the economy means a 90% cut in carbon emissions in every sector. What I've done in my book is to look at how those cuts could be achieved, look at all those sectors and show how we can make that 90% cut without bringing industrial civilization crashing down round our ears.
And when we talk about sectors, we mean transportation, energy, construction, etc.
Yep, and our homes, our electricity, aviation, it goes on. Yep.
And I know from having read a previous interview with you that one you left out, which you feel should also be in there as well as agriculture.
That's correct, yes. I haven't given that as much attention as it deserves.
And when you say that there are these cuts that can happen without stopping technological civilization in its tracks, either in the Chinas and Indias of the world or, the richer nations, a couple of examples.
Yeah, okay, well, let's take transport, for example, surface transport. At the moment, we have most people in their cars. I mean, ideally, we'd get a lot of people into public transport, but let's just stick with the car for a moment and look, first of all, at fuel economy. It's just mind-blowing. In the United States, at present, fuel economy is roughly 21 miles per gallon.
And for those who don't know, it has basically stuck there for 30 years.
Well, let me put this in context. In 1908, the Model T Ford did 25 miles to the gallon. The Model T Ford in 1908 would have had a better energy efficiency than the average car in the United States does today. It's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And it's because of a complete failure by government to say that it's got to be more efficient. Now, it is entirely possible to have perfectly reasonable cars which do 100 miles to the gallon. The technology already exists. There's no technological leap required. It just has to be applied. But it's not being applied because the political will to apply it is not there.
Well, let me ask a question quickly on that one, which is that the companies that have pioneered some of those things or prototyped some of those things, you mentioned that Toyota prototyped one and showed it at auto shows and then has gone no further than the Prius since then, which basically I have one. I'm very glad I have it, and I get about 42 miles to the gallon. Why doesn't a company stick its neck out and do it?
Well, it's a very good question, and they demonstrate that it can be done with these prototypes, for example, and then I don't know what it is. Maybe they're worried that people won't want a car which has all those features. I don't know why people wouldn't want such a car. Maybe they just don't want to make the sufficient investment in the manufacturing process in order to turn those cars out. The overall answer to that is that there's not enough pressure coming from customers and coming from governments to say, you've got to do this. And if the pressure was there, they would do it because they would have to do it. But we're not putting that pressure on. We're not mobilizing on this issue nearly hard enough or nearly fast enough. And until we do, they're not going to respond. But I was going to come on to say that it could go even further than that. Let's look beyond the fuel efficiency of the gas-powered car. Let's look at where you go next. People talk about biofuels and hydrogen. They've got enormous problems for all sorts of reasons we could go into if we like. But let's look at one kind of car which is viable right now, which doesn't cause the sort of environmental damage that biofuels cause, and could turn into an incredibly effective means of transportation. That's the electric car. Now, at the moment, the problem with the electric car is that you drive 100 miles and you have to stop, plug it in, and wait for 8 hours or so while the battery fills up again. But what if you don't own your own battery? What if you lease your battery from a network of filling stations? The battery starts to run down, you pull into a filling station, lift up the hood, a crane comes over, pulls out the old battery, drops in a new one, and you're off. You pay a lease fee for the battery, you pay a fee for the electricity. It takes no more time than filling up your tank with gas. Then you have unlimited mileage in an electric car. And if that electricity is being provided at night, so the topping up the batteries at night from offshore wind farms, you basically have carbon-free driving or something very close to it. Now, that's even before we look at how to get a lot of people out of their cars and into public transport, but you can see this enormous technological potential. Again, there's no major technological leap needs to be made. They just need to be applied.
And the infrastructure of the gas stations could absolutely adapt to this.
It's not difficult. What's lacking is government saying this has to be done.
Exactly.
And government's not going to say it has to be done until we say to government, you have to say it.
Right. We actually are down to our last minute. It's gone incredibly quickly, and I would like to pick this conversation up again soon if we may.
Sure.
Okay. I want to tell people, and I didn't get to half the things I want to talk about, but I do want to tell you, the book again is Heat, How to Stop the Planet from Burning. And you've gotten some sense by, I think, that discussion of transportation, what's in there, and you apply that same kind of analysis to every sector. But the call is that none of those sectors will do the improvements they need to unless we apply the pressure. The websites are monbiot.com, that's monbiot.com, and turnuptheheat.org. Thank you, George Monbiot. Keep up the good work.